A bobcat sneaks into a house and lounges in a dog's bed. At first it seems like a bizarre accident, but what happens next leaves everyone completely shocked. The homeowner thinks it's just a wild animal resting, but then strange details begin to surface. The scar on its side, the way it refuses to leave, the way the dog doesn't attack at all points to something far more dangerous. And when the truth is revealed, it shakes the entire household to its core. This isn't just about a bobcat in the wrong place at the wrong time. It's about a secret someone desperately wanted to keep hidden. What was this wild creature really doing there, and what happens when survival instincts collide with a shocking human truth? Before we begin, let me know where you're watching from. It turns this little corner of the internet into something bigger, something shared. The autumn sun had long since dipped below the horizon when Clara Whitmore's old pickup truck rattled. Up the gravel driveway to her farmhouse, the headlights cut through the gathering dusk, illuminating the weathered wooden porch and the cluster of maple trees that surrounded her modest home. After 14 hours at the clinic, her shoulders ached from performing back-to-back surgeries on a horse with colic and treating a litter of sick puppies. "Almost there, Boone," she murmured to her German shepherd in the passenger seat. His amber eyes gleamed in the darkness as his ears perked forward, more alert than usual. Clara noticed his sudden tension, but attributed it to the typical end of day excitement of coming home. The truck's engine sputtered to silence, and Clara gathered her medical bag from the back seat. The crisp October air nipped at her cheeks as she stepped out, her boots crunching on the gravel. Boone jumped down after her, but instead of his usual routine of bounding toward the porch, he stood rigid, his nose twitching as he sampled the evening air. "What is it, boy?" Clara asked, watching as his muscular frame tensed. The scar on his muzzle, a reminder of a long-ago encounter with a frightened stallion, seemed to stand out more prominently in the deepening twilight. Boone let out a low whine, something Clara had rarely heard from her typically confident companion. Her hand instinctively tightened on her medical bag. Years of working with animals had taught her to trust their instincts, and Boone's behavior was decidedly unusual. They approached the porch together, Clara's free hand resting on Boone's broad back. The motion sensor light flickered on, casting long shadows across the wooden planks. Clara pulled her keys from her jacket pocket, the familiar jingle somehow seeming louder in the evening quiet. Inside, the house was dark and still, yet something felt different. The air held an unfamiliar tension, like the atmosphere before a storm. Clara flicked on the lights, illuminating her simple living room with its well-worn furniture and the scattered veterinary journals on the coffee table. Boone moved cautiously through the house, his nails clicking against the hardwood floors. His behavior grew increasingly peculiar as they approached the utility room where his bed was kept. Instead of heading straight for his water bowl as he usually did, he stood in the doorway, tail straight out behind him, not quite threatening, but definitely on guard. Clara's heart began to beat faster as she reached for the utility room light switch. As brightness flooded the small space, she gasped, her medical bag slipping from suddenly numb fingers to thud against the floor. There, curled up in Boone's oversized bed, was a wild bobcat. The scene before her defied logic. The bobcat, a magnificent creature with tawny fur and distinctive black-tipped ears, was lying in her dog's bed, as if it belonged there. More surprising still was Boone's reaction, or lack thereof. Her protective German shepherd remained alert, but showed no signs of aggression toward the wild animal in his territory. Clara's veterinary training kicked in as she assessed the situation. The bobcat was fully grown, but appeared thin, its sides rising and falling with shallow breaths. It lifted its head slightly at their entrance, but made no move to flee or attack. This in itself was deeply unusual. Wild animals, especially cats, typically responded to human presence with either aggression or flight. "Easy now," Clara whispered, more to herself than either animal. She slowly crouched down, maintaining eye contact with the bobcat while keeping her movements deliberate and non-threatening. That's when she noticed it, a distinct mark on the bobcat's flank that made her blood run cold. Through the fur, she could make out the angry red pattern of what was unmistakably a brand, the kind used to mark livestock. The skin around it was inflamed and possibly infected. explaining the animal's unusual behavior and apparent weakness. "Who did this to you?" she murmured, her heart aching at the sight of such deliberate cruelty. The brand was no accident. Someone had intentionally marked this wild creature as if it were property. Clara's mind raced through her options. Her tranquilizer kit was in her medical bag, now lying at her feet. She could sedate the bobcat, treat its wounds, and release it back into the wild. But something about this situation felt wrong, deeply wrong. The brand meant someone was keeping wild animals illegally, and this one had obviously escaped. Boone moved closer to the bobcat, his posture relaxed but vigilant. To Clara's amazement, the wild cat didn't bristle or hiss. Instead, it watched. The German Shepherd, with what almost looked like recognition. Clara had seen many strange things in her years of veterinary practice, but this interaction between natural adversaries was unprecedented. She reached slowly for her medical bag, careful not to make any sudden movements. The tranquilizer kit was there ready to use, but her hand hesitated on the zipper. The bobcat's eyes met hers. They were clear and alert despite its obvious distress. There was an intelligence in that gaze that gave her pause, a silent communication that seemed to say, "I chose to be here." Clara had always trusted her instincts when it came to animals, and right now, those instincts were telling her this was more than a simple case of a wounded wild animal. The brand suggested something sinister happening in her quiet rural community, something that this bobcat was trying to escape. Looking at Boone's calm acceptance of their unusual guest, Clara made a decision. The tranquilizer would stay in her bag for now. Whatever was going on, this bobcat had sought refuge in her home, and Clara Whitmore had never turned away an animal in need. She slowly sat down on the utility room floor, crossing her legs and making herself as non-threatening as possible. Boone settled beside her, his body warm against her thigh. The bobcat watched them both, its eyes heavy with exhaustion, but still alert. Clara said softly, "I guess we're having a house guest tonight." The autumn night settled around the farmhouse, drawing its dark curtain across the windows. Inside, in the small utility room, an unlikely trio kept vigil: a veterinarian, her German Shepherd, and a branded bobcat. All connected by something deeper than chance or circumstance. Clara knew she should be afraid. She knew she should call animal control or at least sedate the wild animal in her house. But as she watched the bobcat's steady breathing and observed its unusual comfort with Boone, she understood that sometimes the right choice wasn't the obvious one. Whatever had happened to this creature, whatever it was running from, it had chosen her home as its sanctuary. The brand on its flank told a story of human cruelty. But here, in this moment, Clara saw an opportunity for human kindness to make amends. As a veterinarian, she had sworn to help animals in need. As a person who had dedicated her life to healing, she couldn't ignore the silent plea in those wild eyes. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and decisions. For now, Clara settled in for a long night of watching over her unexpected patient. While Boone maintained his gentle vigilance, the bobcat's presence was a mystery that would need unraveling. But tonight, in this quiet room, it was simply another soul in need of shelter and compassion. Clara pushed open her front door, fumbling for the light switch. The warm glow illuminated her cozy living room. But Boone was already padding purposefully toward the utility room where his bed was kept. His behavior remained oddly controlled, lacking his usual exuberant house check routine. "Boone?" Clara called softly, following him. The sight that greeted her in the utility room stopped her dead in her tracks. There, curled up in Boone's oversized bed, lay a wild bobcat. The animal's mottled fur was dirty and matted in places, but what struck Clara most was its stillness. Instead of the explosive reaction she'd expect from a cornered wild animal, the bobcat merely lifted its head, regarding her with eyes that held an unsettling mixture of wariness and exhaustion. Clara's breath caught in her throat. In her 15 years as a veterinarian, she'd never seen anything quite like this. Her hand instinctively moved toward her phone, but she hesitated. Something about this situation felt different from the usual wildlife calls she handled. Boone, surprisingly, showed no aggression. He stood at Clara's side, his posture alert but not threatening. If anything, he seemed protective of the Bobcat. "Easy there," Clara murmured, her voice taking on the gentle tone she used with frightened animals. She set her medical bag down slowly, keeping her movements deliberate and calm. The Bobcat's eyes tracked her every move, but it remained surprisingly still. As she carefully approached, the utility room's fluorescent light revealed more details. The Bobcat was young, probably not more than 2 years old. And despite its wild nature, it showed signs of previous human contact. But what made Clara's heart clench was the angry mark along its flank, a deliberate brand seared into the flesh. With cruel precision, "Oh, you poor thing," she whispered. The burn was partially healed, but still angry-looking, its pattern too precise to be accidental. A memory surfaced 3 years ago. She'd treated a horse with similar marks. The case had led to an animal cruelty investigation, but the perpetrator had never been caught. Clara glanced at her medical bag, then back at the Bobcat. "I'm going to call you Ash," she said softly, the name coming to her as she noticed the great-inged fur around its face. "And I'm going to help you, if you'll let me." Moving with practiced efficiency, she prepared her supplies while maintaining a running commentary in a low, soothing voice. Boone stationed himself near the doorway, his attention divided between watching the hallway and monitoring the Bobcat. "This might sting a bit," Clara warned, as she filled a syringe with local anesthetic. To her amazement, Ash remained still as she approached, as if understanding her intent. The Bobcat flinched slightly at the needle's touch, but didn't struggle. As Clara cleaned and treated the brand, her mind raced. The mark wasn't random. It was a symbol, crude but deliberate. Someone had done this intentionally, marking this wild creature as property. The thought made her stomach turn. Working methodically, she applied antibiotic ointment and a light dressing, knowing the bandage wouldn't last long, but hoping it would help protect the wound for at least a little while. Throughout the procedure, Ash remained remarkably cooperative, only occasionally tensing when she touched a particularly sensitive spot. "There you go," she murmured, sitting back on her heels. "That should feel a bit better." Dumb, the Bobcat's eyes met hers, and for a moment, Clara felt an unexpected connection with the wild creature. There was intelligence in that gaze and something more trust, however tentative. Boone's sudden low growl drew her attention. His ears were pricked forward, focused on something outside. Clara moved to the utility room's small window, pushing aside the curtain carefully. The security light had activated, illuminating her backyard and the edge of the woods beyond. Fresh tire tracks cut through her lawn, the deep ruts visible even in the artificial light. They hadn't been there when she'd arrived home. Someone had. Driven close to her house while she'd been tending to Ash, the realization hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't a random occurrence. The Bobcat hadn't simply wandered onto her property seeking help. Someone had either left it here or followed it here, and they were watching. Clara's hands curled into fists. She'd seen too many cases of animal abuse in her career, had too often been forced to merely treat the symptoms while the perpetrators went unpunished. Not this time. Whether it was wisdom or foolishness, she knew she couldn't turn Ash over to whoever had branded him. "You're safe here," she told the Bobcat firmly. Even as she moved to check that all her doors were locked, Boone followed her, his muscular frame tense with alertness. The German Shepherd's presence was reassuring. But Clara knew that by choosing to protect Ash, she was likely inviting trouble. She returned to the utility room with a bowl of water and some leftover chicken from her refrigerator. Ash watched her place them within easy reach, those intelligent eyes following her every movement. "We'll figure this out," she promised, both to the Bobcat and herself. "Whatever's going on, whatever brought you here, we'll figure it out." As if in response, Boone pressed against her leg, his solid warmth a reminder that she wasn't facing. This alone? Clara reached down to scratch behind his ears, her mind already working through the implications of her decision. Someone had hurt this animal, marked it like property, and might be looking for it. By choosing to protect Ash, she was potentially making herself a target, but looking at the branded Bobcat, seeing the trust it had placed in her, despite its obvious mistreatment, Clara knew she couldn't do anything else. Whatever came next, she would face it. She'd sworn an oath to protect and heal animals. And that oath didn't come with exceptions for dangerous situations. The security light outside clicked off, plunging the backyard into darkness. Clara remained by the window, watching the shadows. While Boone kept his vigil and Ash rested in the borrowed bed, the night stretched ahead, full of uncertainties. But Clara's resolve was set. She had made her choice, and she would see it through. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Clara's front porch as she sorted through medical supplies. 3 days had passed since Ash's arrival, and the Bobcat was slowly showing signs of improvement. Clara wiped sweat from her forehead, taking a moment to appreciate the peaceful quiet of her rural property. The rumble of an approaching vehicle shattered that peace. A black pickup truck, gleaming with an unnatural showroom shine, kicked up dust as it rolled down her driveway. Clara straightened, instantly alert. She didn't recognize the truck, but something about its deliberate approach set her nerves on edge. Boone emerged from the house, positioning himself at Clara's side. His usual friendly demeanor was nowhere to be seen. Instead, a low growl rumbled. In his throat, the truck came to a stop, and a tall figure stepped out. Harlan Crowder's expensive boots crunched on the gravel as he approached. Clara knew him by reputation. Most people in the county did. His ranching empire stretched across 3 counties, but whispers about his business practices were never quite loud enough to reach official ears. "Miss Whitmore," Crowder called out, his voice carrying an artificial warmth that didn't reach his eyes. "Hope I'm not interrupting anything." Clara crossed her arms, maintaining her position on the porch. "What can I do for you, Mr. Crowder?" Climbed the porch steps, each movement calculated to display his imposing presence. Up close, his weathered face bore the hard lines of someone used to getting his way. "Now, I believe you have something that belongs to me." "I'm not sure what you mean," Clara replied evenly, though her heart had begun to race. Beside her, Boone's growl grew slightly louder. Crowder's fake smile tightened. "Come now, Miss Whitmore. You both know what I'm talking about." The Bobcat. "It's my property, and I've come to collect it." Clara felt a chill despite the warm afternoon. "Wildlife isn't property, Mr. Crowder, and if you're referring to the injured bobcat I'm treating, it's under my care as a licensed veterinarian. That animal was part of a legitimate wildlife management program," Crowder said, his voice hardening. "The brand proves ownership. I can show you the paperwork." "Interesting," Clara replied. "Because I've worked with every legitimate wildlife program in this state, and none of them use branding. It's considered inhumane." A flash of anger crossed Crowder's face before he could mask it. "You're making this more complicated than it needs to be. I'm willing to compensate you for your trouble." He reached into his jacket, pulling out a checkbook. The movement was meant to look casual, but Clara caught the underlying threat in his posture. "This isn't about money," Clara said. Firmly, that animal was deliberately injured. "As a veterinarian, I'm obligated to report cases of animal cruelty." Crowder's facade cracked. He took a step closer, using his height to loom over her. "Now, you listen here, girl. You have no idea what you're getting involved in." "That cat is my property, and I'm taking it back one way or another." Boone's growl erupted into sharp barks. Clara placed a steadying hand on his collar, but her voice remained steel-strong. "Are you threatening me, Mr. Crowder?" "Threatening?" He gave a cold laugh. "I'm just trying to conduct business." "But since you mention it," he glanced meaningfully. "Around the isolated property, things can get mighty dangerous out here for a woman alone. Accidents happen. Wild animals attack. It would be a shame if something unfortunate were to occur." Clara met his gaze unflinchingly. "I've documented everything about that bobcat's injuries. If anything happens to me or that animal, there's evidence that'll go straight to the authorities." "The authorities?" Crowder sneered. "You really think they'll choose you over me? I own half the county board." "Maybe so," Claire replied. "Are you willing to bet your reputation on it? 'Cause I will not back down." They stood in tense silence, measuring each other. Finally, Crowder stepped back, adjusting his jacket with exaggerated casualness. "You're making a mistake, Miss Whitmore. A big one. The only mistake here is thinking you can intimidate me into enabling animal abuse," Clara said. Now, unless you have a warrant or proper wildlife authority documentation, I'm going to have to ask you to leave my property." Crowder's face darkened. This isn't over. He turned and stalked back to his truck, each step rigid with barely contained rage. Clara watched until the black pickup disappeared in a cloud of dust. Only then did she allow her hands to shake, the full impact of what had just happened hitting her. Boone pressed against her leg, offering silent support. That evening, Clara made several phone calls to contacts in neighboring towns. Each conversation revealed another piece of a disturbing puzzle. A feed store owner remembered suspicious late-night deliveries to Crowder's ranch. A former ranch hand spoke in whispers about strange sounds from a supposedly abandoned barn. Local sheriff's deputy admitted they'd investigated complaints, but could never get enough evidence for a warrant. The pattern was clear. Crowder wasn't just a cruel rancher. He was running something bigger, something that explained why a branded Bobcat would seek refuge in a stranger's home. Clara's computer filled with notes as she connected the dots. Illegal wildlife trafficking. Rumors of underground animal fighting. Rings, mysterious disappearances of both domestic and wild animals. She looked out her window at the darkening sky. Understanding now why Ash had seemed so desperate for sanctuary, the Bobcat wasn't just running from cruelty, it was escaping from an organized operation that treated animals as disposable commodities. Clara checked her security system and double-locked her doors, knowing she'd just made a powerful enemy. But as she heard the soft padding of Boone's paws and caught a glimpse of Ash resting in the utility room, she knew she'd made the right choice. Whatever Crowder had planned, she would not let him win. The battle lines were drawn, and Clara Whitmore was ready to fight. In the quiet of her house, she began making plans. She would need evidence, allies, and most importantly, a way to protect both herself and Ash from whatever revenge Crowder might attempt. The confrontation had made one thing crystal clear. This was no longer just about saving one injured Bobcat. It was about exposing a system of cruelty that had gone unchecked for far too long. As night settled over her property, Clara realized there would be no going back to the quiet life she'd known before. But looking at Ash's sleeping form, she felt a surge of determination. Sometimes she thought the right path wasn't the easy one. It was the one that demanded everything you had to give. Clara leaned against the doorframe of her living room, a steaming mug of coffee warming her hands in. The early morning light, what she witnessed before her, made her heart swell with unexpected emotion. Boone, her usually vigilant German shepherd, lay stretched out on his oversized bed. And curled against his side remarkably was Ash the Bobcat. The unlikely pair dozed peacefully, Ash's injured flank rising and falling with each steady breath. "Well, I never thought I'd see this," Clara whispered to herself. Taking a careful sip of her coffee, it had started gradually over the past week. At first, Ash would merely tolerate Boone's presence during treatment sessions. Then, Clara began noticing small changes. The Bobcat's ears would perk up when Boone entered the room. His usual defensive posture would soften ever so slightly. But this peaceful coexistence was something entirely new. Boone stirred, opening one eye to look at Clara. His tail thumped softly against the bed, careful not to disturb his sleeping companion. Clara couldn't help but smile. Her loyal protector had somehow become a bridge to the wounded wild animal's trust. Later that morning, as Clara prepared medications in her home office, her cell phone buzzed. The name on the screen made her stomach clench. Sandra Martinez, her colleague from the local veterinary board. "Clara, we need to talk." Sandra's voice was tight with concern. "Have you heard what Harlan Crowder's been saying around town?" Clara sank into her desk chair. "No, but I can imagine it's not good. He's telling everyone you're harboring a dangerous wild animal. Says you're putting the whole community at risk." Sandra paused. "There's more. He's hinting that he might file a formal complaint with the board about your judgment and professional conduct." The threat hung in the air like a storm cloud. Clara's hand tightened around the phone. "He's trying to get my license revoked. Just be careful, Clara. Crowder has friends in high places." After hanging up, Clara walked to her window, outside. She could see Boone in the fenced yard, lying in the grass. Ash had taken to watching him from the safety of the screened porch, showing more curiosity each day. The Bobcat's head tilted, tracking Boone's movements with increasing interest rather than fear. The sight strengthened something in Clara's resolve. This wasn't just about protecting an injured animal anymore. It was about standing up to the kind of cruelty that would brand a wild creature and force it to fight, even if it meant risking everything she'd worked for. Throughout the day, Clara observed more subtle changes in Ash's behavior. When she brought food, the Bobcat no longer retreated to the furthest corner. Instead, he waited patiently, watching her with those intelligent eyes. Sometimes, he would even start eating while she was still in the room, a small but significant sign of growing trust. That evening, Clara sat on her porch, sorting through paperwork, veterinary records, wildlife rehabilitation permits, documentation of Ash's injuries. She needed everything in order if Crowder made good on his threats. The sound of tires on gravel made her look up sharply, but it was only her elderly neighbor George returning home. The paranoia was getting to her. Crowder's influence stretched far in their small community. Already she'd noticed some of her regular clients becoming distant, canceling appointments with vague excuses. The rumors were working. Inside, she heard a soft thump, followed by Boone's gentle whine. Clara hurried in, worried something was wrong. Instead, she found Ash had voluntarily moved closer to Boone's bed, lying just a few feet away. The German Shepherd remained perfectly still, as if understanding the delicacy of the moment. "You're quite the diplomat, aren't you?" Clara murmured. To Boone, his tail wagged once in response. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She sat at her kitchen table, reviewing her options. The wildlife sanctuary 3 counties over might take Ash, but they had connections with local law enforcement. If Crowder had as much influence as she suspected, it wouldn't be safe. She needed to find somewhere further, somewhere beyond his reach. A noise from the living room drew her attention. Padding to the doorway, she watched as Ash slowly, cautiously, settled himself right next to Boone. The German Shepherd shifted, slightly, making room, and the Bobcat actually pressed against his side. Seeking warmth and comfort, Clara felt tears prick at her eyes. This was why she became a veterinarian, not just to treat animals' physical wounds, but to help heal their spirits. Ash, despite everything humans had done to him, was learning to trust again. The brand on his flank would always tell the story of mankind's cruelty, but his bond with Boone showed the possibility of redemption. The next morning brought more whispers. At the grocery store, Clara overheard 2 women discussing how that vet's gone crazy, keeping wild animals in her house. At the gas station, the usually chatty attendant barely met her eyes. Crowder was methodically turning the community against her, but something had changed in Clara. Each time doubt crept in. She thought of Ash and Boone, the wild and the domestic. Finding unexpected friendship, they could bridge their differences. She could weather this storm. She spent the afternoon making calls to wildlife sanctuaries in neighboring states, careful to speak in coded terms. Many seemed hesitant when she mentioned their location, Crowder's influence casting a long shadow. But she wouldn't give up. Somewhere, there had to be a place where Ash could heal without fear. That evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Clara sat on her porch steps with Boone at her side. Through the screen door, she could see Ash watching them, his posture relaxed despite his surroundings. The Bobcat's recovery was progressing well. The physical wounds were healing cleanly, but it was the emotional transformation that amazed her most. "We're going to fight this," she told Boone, scratching behind his ears. "Whatever it takes." As if understanding her words, Boone pressed closer to her side. Inside, Ash stood up and moved to the screen door, closer than he'd ever voluntarily come to Clara before. His eyes met hers, and in that moment, she saw no trace of the terrified, angry creature that had first appeared in her home. The bond between Boone and Ash had done more than just aid in the Bobcat's recovery. It had shown Clara what was possible when trust overcame fear. That alone made everything she was risking worth it. Her practice might suffer, her reputation might be questioned, but she would not let Crowder win, not when she had such clear evidence that kindness could triumph over cruelty. As darkness settled over her property, Clara watched Boone and Ash settle into their now familiar sleeping arrangement. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more of Crowder's attempts to break her resolve. Now, in the peaceful communion between dog and Bobcat, she found all the strength she needed to continue the fight. Clara's truck bounced along the dirt road leading to Eli Carver's cabin, kicking up clouds of dust in the early morning light. The retired ranger lived on the outskirts of town, preferring the company of wilderness to people. His weathered mailbox, decorated with a hand-carved eagle, marked the turnoff to his property. She found him on his front porch, cleaning an old pair of binoculars. At 62 years old, Eli still carried himself with the alert posture of a man who'd spent decades watching for trouble in the wild. His lined face crinkled into a smile when he saw her. "Clara Whitmore," he called out, setting aside his work. "Been wondering when you'd show up?" "Word travels fast?" Clara asked, climbing the creaking steps. "In a town this size?" "Lightning slower." He gestured to a second chair. "Heard about your standoff with Crowder, Clara, and Eli? Spread their findings across his oak?" Kitchen table photographs of the branded burn on Ash's flank, medical records, and printouts from the wildlife database showing Ash's original tracking information. The morning sun streamed through the cabin's windows, casting long shadows over their work. "This is it," Eli said, tapping the tracking chip data. Proof that Ash was part of the government's rewilding program before disappearing from their records. Crowder must have intercepted him somehow. Clara nodded, her jaw tight. "We have enough to take to the feds now. The brand alone shows a legal possession of protected wildlife, and with the chip data, her phone buzzed. The number was from her clinic's security system. Clara's heart dropped as she answered, "Hello, Dr. Whitmore." It was Mary, her morning. Receptionist voice shaking. "You need to come right away." "The clinic, it's been destroyed." Clara's hands trembled as she gripped the steering wheel, racing back to town with Eli following in his truck. The sight that greeted her made her stomach lurch. The clinic's front windows were shattered, glass glittering across the sidewalk. Spray paint marred the brick walls with crude threats. "Back off and last warning." Inside was worse. Examination tables were overturned, cabinets ransacked. Expensive diagnostic equipment lay in pieces. Even the computer systems had been smashed. Years of patient records scattered across the floor like confetti. The sharp smell of antiseptic, mixed with something worse, someone had deliberately broken. Open medicine bottles, creating toxic puddles. "Oh God," Clara whispered, stepping carefully through the wreckage. Her staff huddled near the back door, shell-shocked. Mary was crying quietly. Eli moved through the space like the ranger he'd been, taking photos with his phone. "This is deliberate destruction of property. Criminal intimidation." "Crowder," Clara said, the name bitter in her mouth. She picked up a framed photograph of her with a client's horse. The glass was cracked, but the image remained intact. "He's trying to shut me down. He's escalating," Eli agreed grimly. "Trying to force your hand about Ash." Clara thought about the injured. Bobcat back home, slowly learning to trust again under Boone's patient guidance. Just yesterday, she'd watched them sharing the afternoon sun on her back porch. Boone alert, but relaxed. Ash, cautiously stretching out nearby. The sight had filled her with hope. "I won't give in," she said firmly, straightening her shoulders. "Ash deserves justice. All of Crowder's victims do." Eli squeezed her shoulder. "We'll document everything. Add it to our evidence. The feds will want to see this." Clara looked around at her ruined clinic. Her life's work damaged, but not destroyed. Like Ash's spirit, it could be rebuilt. She pulled out her phone to call the police, determination hardening her resolve. Crowder had meant to break her. Instead, he'd only made her fight harder. The night was unusually still when Clara heard Boone's warning bark from outside. She jolted awake in her farmhouse bedroom, the clock reading 11:15. Something was wrong. The German Shepherd's bark wasn't his usual alert. It was urgent, desperate. Then she smelled it. Smoke. Clara ran to her window and her heart stopped. Orange flames were already consuming one side of her barn, the old wood catching like kindling. Through the flickering light, she caught glimpses of dark figures rushing away into the darkness. Crowder's men. She scrambled for her phone, dialing 901 while racing down the stairs. The operator's voice seemed distant as Clara reported the fire. All she could think about was Ash, still recovering in the barn's makeshift recovery stall. Without hesitation, Clara ran toward the burning structure. The heat hit her like a wall as she approached. Boone was already there, barking frantically. At the barn's side entrance, she could hear frightened whinnies from her 2 boarding horses. The back gates opened for the horses. She shouted to Boone, knowing he'd help guide them out. Then she plunged into the barn. Smoke burned her eyes and throat as she navigated the familiar space, now transformed into a maze of fire and shadow. The flames were spreading rapidly across the hay-strewn floor. She could hear Ash yowling from his enclosure. "I'm coming," she called out, dropping low where the air was clearer. She made it to Ash's stall, but the metal latch was scorching hot. Clara wrapped her sleeve around her hand and yanked it open. But as she stepped inside, a burning beam crashed down behind her, blocking the exit. The smoke was overwhelming now. Clara dropped to her knees, coughing violently. Her vision swam. Through watering eyes, she saw Ash press against the far corner of the stall, fur bristling at the approaching flames. Then something extraordinary happened. Instead of cowering, Ash moved toward her. The Bobcat's eyes, reflecting the fire, held a fierce determination she'd never seen before. He grabbed her sleeve in his teeth, pulling insistently. Boone appeared through the smoke, having helped the horses escape. Together, Dog and Bobcat tugged at Clara's clothing, guiding her toward a low gap under the fallen beam. Clara crawled forward, barely conscious now. Trusting these 2 unlikely allies, the cool night air hit her face like salvation. She gulped it down, still coughing as sirens wailed in the distance. Boone pressed against one side of her, while Ash remarkably stayed close on the other. All 3 watching as the barn blazed. In that moment, Clara saw Ash clearly for the first time. This wasn't just an injured wild animal seeking shelter. This was a survivor who, despite everything humans had done to him, chose to fight not just for his own life, but for hers. The branded burn on his flank seemed less a mark of victimhood now, and more a badge of defiance. The morning after the barn fire, Clara sat at her kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. Her throat still felt raw from the smoke, but that wasn't what kept her from sleeping. The image of Crowder's men fleeing into the darkness haunted her. Boone lay at her feet, while Ash had claimed a spot on the window seat, his alert eyes scanning the yard through the glass. The sight of them working together to save her life still amazed her. The Bobcat's transformation from a terrified victim to her brave protector changed everything. The crunch of tires on gravel announced Eli's arrival. The retired ranger's weathered face was grim as he surveyed the charred remains of the barn. "Is it, Clara?" he said, settling into a chair across from her. "This is exactly what we needed to bring them in." He pulled out his phone, showing her photos from his ranger days. "Remember those poaching cases I told you about? Ones where we could never quite pin anything on Crowder? I kept everything." Clara leaned forward, studying the images. They showed similar brandings on other animals, matching the mark on Ash's flank. "You think it's enough, with what we have now?" The tracking chip data, these photos, and attempted arson, Eli nodded firmly. "It's time to call in the feds." Within hours, federal investigators swarmed Clara's property. They photographed the barn, collected samples, and interviewed neighbors who had seen suspicious vehicles. But what really caught their attention was Ash, the lead investigator. Agent Martinez stood slack-jawed as she watched Boone and Ash interact. The German shepherd lay protectively near the Bobcat, who was calmly grooming himself on the window seat. It defied everything they knew about wild animals. "In 20 years of wildlife trafficking cases," Martinez said, shaking her head in wonder, "I've never seen anything like this. This bond alone tells us something extraordinary happened." Here, Eli stepped forward, presenting his carefully preserved evidence. "These photos are from cases spanning 15 years. Same brand, same methods. Crowder's been doing this longer than anyone realized. The evidence mounted throughout the day. Neighbors came forward with security camera footage showing Crowder's men near Clara's property, former employees, emboldened by the federal presence. shared stories of suspicious activities at his ranch. Clara watched it all unfold from her porch, Boone and Ash flanking her like guards. She knew this was just the beginning. Crowder wouldn't surrender his empire without a fight. But looking at Ash, seeing his quiet strength and determination, she felt ready for whatever came next. "We've got enough to move on him, Agent Martinez," announced by day's end. "But he's going to fight back hard. Are you prepared for that, Dr. Whitmore?" Clara scratched behind Boone's ears and glanced at Ash, remembering how they'd dragged her from the flames without hesitation. "We've already survived his worst. We're not backing down now. The sight of federal vehicles lining her driveway filled her with determination. The time for hiding was over. Now it was Crowder's turn to feel hunted. The dawn brought an uneasy stillness to Clara's property. She stood by her kitchen window, watching the first rays of sunlight paint the scorched remains of her barn in harsh shadows. Boone sat alert at her side, his ears pricked forward, while Ash perched on the window seat, his spotted coat catching the morning light. Agent Martinez had stationed 2 federal agents in unmarked cars near Clara's driveway overnight. Their presence should have been reassuring, but Clara's fingers still trembled as she lifted her coffee mug to her lips. Years of dealing with injured animals had taught her to trust her instincts, and right now, every nerve in her body screamed. That trouble was coming. The sound came first, the rumble of multiple engines approaching from the main road. Boone's low growl vibrated through the floorboards. Ash's muscles tensed, his ears flattening against his skull. "They're here," Clara whispered, reaching for her phone to alert Agent Martinez. Before she could dial, 3 large pickup trucks burst through her gate, splintering the wooden posts. They fanned out across her front yard, dust billowing behind their tires. The center truck's door swung open, and Harlan Crowder stepped out, boots crunching on gravel. 5 more men emerged from the other vehicles, each carrying rifles. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs, but she stood her ground. "Last chance, Whitmore." Crowder's voice boomed across the yard. "Send out my property, and maybe we can forget about all this federal nonsense." Clara moved to her front door, Boone at her heel. She could hear Ash padding quietly behind them. Through the screen door, she called back, "You know I can't do that, Harlan. The authorities are already on their way." Crowder's laugh was cruel and sharp. "You think I'm worried about some city officials with badges? I've been running this operation longer than you've been playing doctor to these worthless creatures." He gestured to his men, who began spreading out around the house. "We're taking the cat one way or another." Clara's fingers found Boone's collar, steadying herself. The German shepherd's muscles were coiled tight, ready to launch at her command. Behind her, Ash let out a low, threatening yowl, not the sound of prey, but of a predator ready to fight. The first shot cracked through the morning air, shattering her front window. Clara dropped to the floor, pulling Boone down with her. Ash darted to higher ground, taking position on her bookshelf with practiced precision. "That was a warning," Crowder shouted. "Next one won't be." Clara Army crawled to her kitchen, reaching for the landline she kept for emergencies. Her hands shook as she dialed Agent Martinez's number. "They're here," she whispered when the agent answered. "Crowder and 5 armed men. They're trying to take Ash." "Stay down," Martinez ordered. 3 minutes out. Teams approaching from all directions. Another shot rang out, this one splintering the door frame. Boone's barking reached a fever pitch, and Clara had to grab his collar to keep him from charging through the door. "Easy, boy," she murmured. "Not yet." The sound of breaking glass from her back door sent ice through her veins. They were coming in from both sides. Clara reached for the tranquilizer gun she'd started keeping loaded since the barn fire. It wasn't much against rifles, but it was something. Heavy boots thudded on her back porch. Ash's growl grew deeper, more threatening. Clara had never heard such a sound from him before. It was the voice of every fight he'd been forced to survive. Every scar he'd earned. The back door splintered inward. 2 of Crowder's men burst through, rifles raised. Before they could level their weapons, Ash launched himself from the bookshelf. His powerful body slammed into the first man's chest, claws extended, sending both sprawling. The man's scream pierced the air as Ash's claws found purchase. Boone broke free from Clara's grip, charging the second intruder. The German Shepherd's training kicked in, going for the arm, holding the rifle. The weapon clattered to the floor as man and dog tumbled. Into the wall, more breaking glass from the front. Clara raised the tranquilizer gun, her veterinarian's hand steady, despite her racing heart. The first man through her front window took a dart to the shoulder, his eyes going wide with surprise before he slumped to the floor. Federal agents. "Drop your weapons," Agent Martinez's voice boomed through a megaphone, accompanied by the screech of tires and slamming car doors. "The property is surrounded." Clara caught a glimpse through her shattered window of Crowder spinning around, his face contorted with rage as federal vehicles blocked his trucks. Agents in tactical gear poured out, weapons raised. "This is all your fault." "Whoa," Crowder screamed. Turning back toward the house, he raised his rifle, aiming straight at Clara through the broken window. Time seemed to slow. Clara saw Ash spring from his position, a blur of spotted fur and extended claws. Boone charged from the other direction. Both animals slammed into Crowder simultaneously, sending his shot wide. The bullet whizzed past Clara's ear, pet, pet, embedding itself in the kitchen cabinet behind her. The impact drove Crowder backward through the remnants of her front window. He landed hard on his back, Ash pinning his chest, while Boone held his gun arm in powerful jaws. The branded scar on Ash's flank was clearly visible in the morning light, damning evidence on full display for all the federal agents to see. Federal agents freeze. Multiple red laser sights danced across Crowder's body as agents surrounded him. "Release the weapon. Hands where we can see them." Clara stayed down, her whole body trembling as she listened to the chaos outside. The sounds of multiple arrests, Miranda rights being read, the click of handcuffs. Agent Martinez's boots crunched on broken glass as she entered through what remained of Clara's front door. "Dr. Whitmore? Are you hurt?" Clara shook her head still. Processing what had just happened, Boone returned to her side, pressing his warm body against her leg. Ash remained by the window, watching intently as Crowder was led away in handcuffs, his expression murderous. "That brand on your Bobcat, Martinez," said, helping Clara to her feet. "Perfect match to all the other evidence we've gathered, along with attempted murder, breaking and entering, and everything else that just happened here." Crowder's looking at a very long time behind bars. Clara surveyed her destroyed home, shattered windows, splintered doors, bullet holes in her walls. The cost of standing up to Crowder had been high, but watching him being placed in the back of a federal vehicle made it worth it. Ash padded over to her, pressing against her other leg, forming a protective triangle with Boone. "We did it," she whispered, reaching down to touch both animals gently. "We really did it." The property swarmed with law enforcement crime scene. Technicians photographing evidence, agents interviewing witnesses, paramedics treating the man Ash had attacked. Clara sat on her front steps, an emergency blanket draped over her shoulders, watching it all unfold. The morning sun climbed higher, illuminating the scene of their victory. Hard won, but finally complete. Agent Martinez approached, holding up her phone. "Just got word raids are happening simultaneously at 3 of Crowder's other properties. We're finding more animals, more evidence. This goes deeper than we thought, but his operation is finished." "You did good, Dr. Whitmore. You and your unusual family here." Clara looked at Boone and Ash, both still standing guard despite the danger being over. The German Shepherd's muzzle was scratched, and Ash had a small cut above his eye, but they were otherwise unharmed. Their unwavering loyalty had saved her life, had helped bring down a criminal empire. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving Clara shaky and exhausted. But as she watched Crowder's vehicles being towed away and evidence bags being filled, she felt something else: peace. Justice had been served, not just for Ash, but for all the animals who had suffered under Crowder's cruelty, in the quiet aftermath of Crowder's arrest. Clara stood in her damaged clinic, surveying the wreckage. Shattered glass crunched beneath her boots as she walked through the waiting room. The morning sun streamed through broken windows, illuminating the scattered papers and overturned furniture, evidence of the violence that had touched her peaceful world. "We can replace everything," she murmured to Boone, who padded faithfully beside her. The German Shepherd's tail wagged gently as he pressed against her leg, offering silent support. Agent Martinez had left an hour ago after delivering the news. The federal investigation had uncovered 3 more illegal fighting rings and rescued dozens of animals. Crowder's network was completely dismantled. His empire of cruelty reduced to case files and evidence boxes. Clara picked up a fallen picture frame, a photo of her graduation day from veterinary school. The glass was cracked, but the image remained clear. A younger version of herself, full of dreams about healing animals. She smiled, realizing those dreams hadn't just survived. They'd grown stronger. A soft thump made her turn. Ash had jumped onto the examination table, his branded flank catching the light. The Bobcat's eyes, once wild with fear, now held a steady calm. The federal wildlife authorities had made their decision that morning. Clara would maintain guardianship of Ash until a suitable sanctuary space became available. "You're staying with us for a while longer," she told him, reaching out slowly. Ash allowed her touch, even leaning into her hand, a trust that still amazed her. Boone sat nearby, watching with what Clara could have sworn was satisfaction. The clinic's phone rang, startling them all. Clara answered to find Eli Carver on the line, the retired ranger's voice warm with concern. "How are you holding up, Clara?" "Better than the clinic," she replied, looking around at the damage. "But we'll rebuild, stronger this time." "The whole town's talking about what happened," Eli said. "You've got more support than you might think. My contractor friend says he can start repairs next week, and there's a fundraiser being organized at the community center." Tears pricked at Clara's eyes. When she'd first found Ash in her home, she'd felt so alone in her stand against Crowder. Now she realized that doing the right thing, no matter how difficult, had a way of bringing out the best in others too. "Thank you. You, Eli, for everything." After hanging up, Clara walked to the back of the clinic where her private office overlooked the recovery kennels. Most were empty now, but she could already picture them full again, a safe haven for animals in need. The thought made her smile. Boone's ears perked up as Ash approached him, and Clara watched in wonder as the 2 animals settled down together. The German Shepherd, ever protective, and the wild Bobcat who'd found his courage, they'd formed a bond that defied explanation. Clara sat at her desk, pulling out a fresh notebook. The events of the past weeks had shown her something important. Being a veterinarian wasn't just about treating injuries and illness. It was about standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. She began writing, outlining plans for a new program at the clinic. She would work with law enforcement to provide emergency care for rescued wildlife. Her experience with Ash had taught her valuable lessons about rehabilitation. She intended to put that knowledge to use. The sound of vehicles outside drew her attention. Through the window, she saw several trucks pulling up, volunteers from the community. Come to help with the cleanup. Among them were familiar faces, clients whose pets she'd treated, farmers whose livestock she'd saved, neighbors who'd watched her stand against Crowder's intimidation. "Look at that," she said to her unlikely family. Boone's tail thumped against the floor, and Ash's ears twitched forward. Turns out we're not alone after all. As she walked out to greet the volunteers, Clara felt a profound sense of peace. The intrusion that had brought Ash into her life, what had seemed like a frightening disruption, had actually been the beginning of something remarkable, had awakened a courage she hadn't known she possessed, and given her a clearer sense of purpose. She wasn't just Clara Whitmore, a rural veterinarian anymore. She was a defender of the defenseless, a voice for those who had none. The scars on her clinic would heal, just as Ash's branded flank would always bear witness to his past. But it was what they did with their healing that mattered most. Boone and Ash watched from the doorway as Clara joined her neighbors, her presence a reminder of how unexpected allies could become family. Together, they had faced down cruelty, and won. Now, they would help others do the same. The morning sun climbed higher, warming the scarred building and the determined people gathering to help rebuild. Clara picked up a broom, ready to begin the work of restoration. She knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them with the same courage that had brought her through this trial. Behind her, Boone let out a contented sigh and settled down next to Ash, both of them watching over their human as she took the first steps toward her renewed purpose. If tonight's story sat quietly in your heart, subscribe and send it to someone who might need the same comfort.